Even the Beyoncés sometimes get it wrong.
Well, I thought there'd be a podium, so I'm a bit scared. Chris asked me to tell again how we found the structure of DNA. And since, I follow his orders, I'll do it. But it slightly bores me. And I wrote a book. So I'll say something. I'll say a little about, how the discovery was made and why Francis and I found it. And then I hope maybe I have at least 5 minutes to say what makes me tick now.
The discovery of the shape of DNA has a lot of stories associated with it. First of all, was the shape discovered by Watson and Crick, or by Watson, Crick, and Rosalind Franklin? How much credit does she get for the contribution of her diffraction photo 51? What about the fact that Wilkins showed Watson and Crick Franklin's work without her knowledge? We could talk about how to deal with learning that an important scientific figure like Watson is an unabashed racist. There are important stories here. You've probably heard them before. Maybe you've told some of them as you talk about DNA. But the one I want to focus on here is a subplot of this story that involves a chemist, Linus Pauling. I used to say that Linus Pauling was the George Clooney of chemistry, but students don't really know who that is anymore. So now I call him the Beyonce of chemistry. Linus Pauling in the 20s and 30s was doing groundbreaking work on the nature of the chemical bond, and he had proved that he was a master of the model. He's a dynamic person. Everything that he touches seems to turn into gold. People love him. This is Maurice Wilkins talking about watching a lecture that Pauling gave.
We all, a number of us from the lab here, we all went down there to hear Pauling's lecture because we'd heard he was a brilliant lecturer, and he certainly lived up to our expectations. It was brilliant, and it had a sort of a human element and theatrical element of getting things across effectively. It was alive. One was quite inspired by it. He was more sort of godlike, superhuman, great figure, sort of like a presidential person. He's been compared with Sakharov there.
In the early 50s, he had used a model-building, problem-solving approach to unlock the structure of the alpha helix and the beta sheet, which are protein secondary structures. For his groundbreaking work, he wins the Nobel Prize in 1954. He seems that he can do no wrong, much like Beyonce. So Watson and Crick are trying to figure out the shape of DNA. When Pauling turns his same model-building approach onto trying to figure out DNA structure, they're worried. But the structure that he ends up with, it doesn't work. He has a triple helix with the bases pointing to the outside. He doesn't pay attention to Chargaff's data about base pairing. A pairs with T, C pairs with G. He didn't have access to Franklin's excellent X-ray photos. He got it wrong.
So there was the paper, and he proposed a three-stranded structure, and I read it, and it was crap. So this was, unexpected from the world. And so it was held together by hydrogen bonds between phosphate groups. Well, at the peak pH that cells have, around 7, those hydrogen bonds couldn't exist. We rushed over to the chemistry department and said, could Pauling be right? And Alex Todd said no, so we were happy.
Pauling's son, who is feeding Watson and Crick his preprint manuscripts, is another interesting subplot.
About 15 months after I got to Cambridge, or rumors began to appear from Linus Pauling's son, who was in Cambridge, that his father was now working on DNA. And so one day Peter came in, it says Peter Pauling, and gave me a copy of his father's manuscripts. And boy, I was scared, because I thought, we may be scooped. I have nothing to do, no qualifications for anything.
And allows Watson and Crick to realize that they still are ahead of the game, and they still have a chance to scoop the structure of DNA before Pauling does. Pauling gets it wrong, and it's important for students to know that even the Beyoncés get it wrong sometimes. Watson says of him later, "Then there's Linus Pauling. Linus's fame had gotten himself into a position where everyone was afraid to disagree with him. The only person he could freely talk to was his wife, who reinforced his ego, which isn't what you need in this life. I don't mind if my ego is reinforced sometimes, but of course it's also possible that Watson was just a bit of an a-hole. When we hold up these successful dynamic science figures for students as examples of what can be done, it's also really important that students know that they often fail.